Okay, so previous topic we discussed about the different properties of aggregate. Okay, so the desirable properties which required for the construction of highway pavement is nothing but the strength, hardness, toughness, durability, shape, and adhesion with bitumen. So these are the very important properties of aggregate which are considered during the highway construction. Okay. So in previous, we discussed about these different types of rocks like igneous rocks, metamorphic rock, and sediment rock, which are reasonably hard and durable, which are a smooth polish with a fine grain and high absorption of water. Okay, and these are good for the sub-base and base courses. Okay, so these are the also some different properties of aggregate like strength. It should be good strength, it should be good hardness, it should be toughness, it should be durable and having a shape like you can say the angular shape and rounded shape and good adhesion with the bitumen. So these properties also considered during the selection of aggregate for the pavement construction. Okay. So as we discussed earlier, the fine aggregate, which is nothing but the aggregate mainly between the size of 5 mm to 75 micron in size. The coarse aggregate having the particle size mainly the larger than 5 mm in size. Then crush rock, which aggregate obtained from the crushing of bedrock, and all particles are the angular, and screenings, the chips and the dust or powder that are produced in the crushing of bedrock for the aggregates. Okay, so these are the desirable properties of aggregates, and the aggregate forms the major part of the pavement structure, and it is the prime material which is used in pavement construction. So the aggregate have to primarily bear load, stresses occurring on the road and runways, and have to resist wear due to abrasion action of traffic. So these aggregate often serve as angular base course. Okay. Uh, Thus, the properties of aggregates are of considerable significance. So these aggregates which are used in the surface course have to withstand the high magnitude of stresses, wear and tear due to abrasion. Such aggregates should have sufficiently high strength or resistance to crushing. So the crushing characteristic is also important, and this aggregate further needs to be hardy enough to resist the wear due to abrasive action of traffic. Next important characteristics, that is the specific gravity. The specific gravity of stone is considered to be a measure for finding the suitability and strength characteristics of the aggregate. Higher the specific gravity, better is the road aggregate. The presence of air voids or pores in stone is another property which may indicate the suitability and strength characteristics of stone. But more the voids, the strength is likely to be less. Of course, the specific gravity of such stone will also be the lower. Okay, so the basically here through size of the aggregate we consider, then flaky and elongated aggregate should be avoided as far as possible for the construction. Then the rounded aggregates may be preferred in cement concrete mix due to better workability. Okay, so for the same proportion of cement paste and for the same water cement ratio, whereas the rounded particles are not preferred in granular base course and waterborne macadam construction, as the stability due to interlocking is lesser in this aggregate. So in a such construction, angular particles are preferred, okay, but mostly the rounded particles are preferred for the highway construction. Okay, so these desirable properties of aggregate thus depend on the type of pavement of construction, traffic, and climatic conditions. Okay, so these desirable properties of aggregate which find out by the different tests on the aggregate. Okay, so what are the different tests on aggregate? So the common test on aggregate in India are the nothing but the gradation test, that is the shape test, then consisting of sieve analysis, flakiness index test, and angularity and number test. Second test is the specific gravity test, then porosity test and water absorption test. Next, the estimation of clay lumps and soft particles. And the next important, that is what the strength of aggregate, that is the strength test such as aggregate crushing test, then a hardness test such as Los Angeles abrasion test, then aggregate impact test, then aggregate polishing and stripping test. So these are the different very important tests which we are using for the testing of highway material, that is aggregate. Okay, so in this desirable properties, the first one is the strength. So this aggregate must be bear the traffic load without getting crushed. So it should be withstand over the load. Then top layer indirect contact with the traffic should be strongest. Okay, so the aggregate which are used for the pavement construction should be strongest and should not be crushed during the bearing the traffic load. So that is what the crushing strength test. Okay, so that crushing test we are going to check here for the aggregate to find out the strength of the aggregate. Next, the hardness of the aggregate. So hardness test, that is Los Angeles abrasion test, which is used for the to find out the hardness of the aggregate. So hardness, it's nothing but the properties of aggregate. So continuous wear and tear under the wheels of vehicles, that is called as abrasion, and the rubbed with each other due to application of traffic load, that is called as attrition. Okay, so this test that is called as hardness test, which is used or find out by the Los Angeles abrasion test, and other, that is what the polish stone test. Okay, so this Los Angeles abrasion test, which is used to find out the hardness of the aggregate. So the next important properties, that is toughness of the aggregate, and to find out the toughness of the aggregate, the impact test, aggregate impact test, which is used to find out the toughness of the aggregate, and that is ability to sustain impact loading. Okay, so why the toughness test is find out for the aggregate? To find out the ability to sustain the impact loading, and this toughness characteristics or properties of aggregate which can be find out by using impact test. Next, that is the durability of aggregate, and the durability is nothing but the gradual deterioration due to continuous exposure to the environment. Okay, so that aggregate which are used for the pavement construction, it should be highly durable, and to find out the durability of aggregate, we need to conduct the soundness test. Okay, so soundness test which is used for the find out the durability of aggregate. The next important test, that is called as shape test. Okay, so this test is used to find out the shape of the aggregate. Okay, so either it is angular shape or either it is a rounded shape. So that shape test which find out from the flakiness index, elongation index, and angularity number. So these are the different tests which are used to find out the shape of the aggregate. Okay, so one of the tests, that is called as gradation test. So gradation test is the most common test performed on aggregate, and uh, objective or significance of this test is to determine the particle size distribution of fine and coarse aggregate by sieving or screening that aggregate. Okay, so this is the determined by separating the aggregate into portion which are retained or number of sieves or screen having specific opening which are suitably graded from the coarse to fine. Okay, so gradation test, it is nothing but a sieve analysis test, and where the different types of sieve like a square hole, then perforated plates, this type of sieves which are used for the sieve designation for 80 mm, for 63 mm, for 50 mm, for 43 mm up to 4.75 mm. And second type of sieve which is used as a fine mesh or wire cloths for the sieve designation is 3.35 mm to 75 micron. Okay, so that means for a smaller size which is used, that is fine mesh or wire cloth, and for the larger size, that is square hole on or perforated plates, which are used to find out the gradation of that aggregate. Okay, so here is the shape test. to find the flakiness index and the elongation index and angularity index. Okay, so these are the three mechanical measures of the particle shape which may be included in the specification for the road construction. So these are the flakiness index, elongation index, and angularity number. So the first thing is the flakiness index. So the flakiness index of an aggregate is the percentage by weight of particles whose least dimension, that is thickness, is less than 3/5 of their mean dimension. And the second definition, it is nothing but the elongation index. So elongation index, it is nothing but elongation index of an aggregate is the percentage by weight of particles whose greatest dimension, that is length, is greater than 1 and 4/5 times their mean dimension. Okay, so these are about the flakiness index and elongation index, which are different tests to find out the shape and size of the aggregate. Either it may be angular size, either it may be the rounded size. Okay, and one of the angularity number, these also one of the tests which are used to identify the uh, shape of the aggregate. So the angularity number of an aggregate is the amount to the nearest whole number by which the percentage of voids exceed 33% when aggregate is compacted in a specified manner in a standardized metal container. Okay, so these about the different shapes different shape properties like flakiness index, elongation index, and angularity number, which is used to find out the shape of the aggregate, that is either it is angular or rounded shape. And basically, the most importantly aggregate which is used for the construction, it is nothing but the rounded aggregates which are preferred for the pavement construction, and sometimes the angular particles are also preferred in some cases of the construction of the pavements.